So this is our lesson on how to use EBSCO Discovery Service to access all of our digital content. The first thing you need to do absolutely is sign in with your ncpsk12.org account. And then on the home page of the high school library, we've now moved the search widget, which we call, to the home page of the school library webpage. So just type in a search there, and this will lead you to your results. Now, that was a pretty lame search, as you can see, equity or education, and we have 35 million results. Well, that's just crazy. So what we're going to do now is start to manipulate that search in the top left-hand corner and try to narrow these search results a little bit. So we've just taken it down to 9 million by just making sure that the article had both equity and education. And you'll notice that we didn't write the words equity and education. We wrote EQU asterisk and then EDU asterisk. So we're being very inclusive. It's looking for the root of the word equity, which means it could also include equality. And as it was pointed out in one of the classes, also the word equation, which complicates things a little bit, and you can see that in result number 2. We can take that out by choosing not equation. So we're going to go to our next refinement, and we've taken it down to 6 million by adding school or district or students to the second line. We're going to keep refining. Now we're down to 9,000, which is significant, just by changing EDU and equity in the title. So as opposed to being anywhere in the article, it specifically has to be in the title, and that's significantly reduced the number of search results. Please note that you can add or take away rows in the searching options. So we're going to break the search down a little bit further. We have equity or equality anywhere in the document. Now we've looked for school or district or student, and you'll notice the asterisk, so that's student or students, anywhere in the title of the document. We're also looking for admin, as in administration, or school, or EDU, or education, or schools, anywhere in, that is the title of the publication. So district administration would be a good example. Here we're looking for education or educational anywhere in the subject. And here we're looking for socioeconomic anywhere in the document. So now our results are down to almost 4,000, almost 4,000. And that's getting to be a little bit more manageable, but it's still an awful lot. So we're going to continue to refine as we've done here. We've taken it down to 2,000. And now we're down to actually just 4. So in looking through these results, it says they're not actually brilliant. So we kind of want to backtrack it a little bit. And we changed it. And now 67 is a pretty manageable number of results. We've perused through all of them, and this is a really solid list. So let's say this is our search for, we're looking for issues of equity in education. So what I want to show is on the left-hand side of this search results page, we have a lot of options that are frequently overlooked. So we're going to go through them one by one. So at the very top, it says your current search is, and it gives you your search. But the most important thing on this is that you always want full text and catalog. That gives you actually the article as opposed to just a summary of the article. You have the option to change the dates of publication. Please note that there's a show more on every single one of these sections, and that's important. Always click on show more to see what other options are available. It gives you source types. This is super helpful if you're looking for newspapers. There are no newspapers listed here because we didn't pull up newspaper articles with that search, but you can narrow it down to ebooks or academic journals, which are 2 that students very often have to look for. Reports are also excellent if you're looking for this kind of information. Always use the show more option. So this is what the show more looks like for the source types. Your list could be a whole lot longer, depending on what your search results are. Remember, we only have 67 results. The subject is super helpful. So if we wanted to look for this, add the subject school districts or equity or education and state, there you go. You have a number of options. Remember, there's always a show more. And very often search results turn up studies from different parts of the world, and we're not interested in those. Sometimes they're very interesting and they tell us a lot about what we're trying to learn, so I'm not necessarily discouraging that you find them from other parts of the world. But if you want to narrow your search results to the United States, you have that option here. So content provider tells you which databases you can check or uncheck. And what you want to be able to do is click on the Show More and start scrolling through this list and making checks along next to the databases you want to use, which seems like a fairly simple thing to do, except that it's hard to know which ones to check. And one indication you have is when you're looking at the results in that page, look at the publication titles. That will tell you, wait, are my search results too hard or too easy? So think to where you are in the research process, because you don't know which to select when. It's not like there's always a good list. There's no clear rule on this. So you want to make sure that you understand which databases will meet the wonder phase, our reference materials. So this, for example, is a pretty solid list for general information, but that list will change depending on what you're researching. It will be different for social studies than it is for English, and it is for science. So here's an example of what would have worked for our education and equity and education search, but that's not always going to work. So what we did was we created a database descriptions spreadsheet, and you can see at the bottom there are different tabs for different subjects, and that will give you a sense of which are reference. So at the top on the left, you'll see we've clumped all the reference resources together, so that would probably be a pretty good list for you to use if you were just doing general information. And we have tabs added for the different disciplines. So that list is actually located on the annex at the top left-hand corner where it says which database. So the question you have now is, what happens when we move from wonder to investigate or even synthesize? And for that, you're really pretty much going to use everything else. But this is a clear indicator of what not to use when you get down to those pages, because we often tell you, don't use reference resources when you get to investigate and you get to synthesis, because we don't want you using superficial, shallow overview resources at that point. Your research will not be meaty enough, and you will not be able to develop topic sentences and body paragraphs. So let's go back to our dream search generating 67 results for just a moment. And we want to make sure that you understand that what's coming up in those results, all of those 67 articles that are appearing, what are they? Those are all of the databases except for the following. So there are some distributors that just say, no, we're not going to play that game. We don't want to be part of that. And so we're just going to keep our stuff separate. So those include CQ Researcher. And my favorite thing about CQ Researcher is that chronology that shows up. So it's kind of like opposing viewpoints or points of view, but in that left-hand column for each of your search topics, and these are pretty highly controversial current events topics, there's a great chronology, and nobody else offers that. So it's a great timeline of whatever has happened with that topic, and I love that. Another major vendor is ProQuest, and ProQuest is super important to us. That's where we find basically all of our newspapers and the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Dallas Morning News, the Hartford Courant, the historical newspapers, national newspapers, what else? Boston Globe, Washington Post, and LA Times, I believe, is also in there. Oh, and the Christian Science Monitor. And The Economist. It's a pretty big list, and those are really like super staples in our research process. So it's important that you kind of keep in mind that none of the ProQuest results are going to appear in those search results. You have to go separately to ProQuest. So why would you use a database for the newspapers when we have an institutional access to the newspaper website? So for example, the New York Times, we subscribe to that as a district. Well, there are a lot of reasons. One, you can cross-search all of these newspapers. Two is you can really refine your search for specific date ranges or different kinds of articles. You can sort your results in different ways. Those are all really helpful. A downside is that you only have access to the institutional account on campus. No way can you access the institutional account from anywhere but the high school. So what do you get from the newspaper website that you would not get from a database? Because it's important to know the distinction. One is multimedia. That doesn't exist in the databases. Two is you can do a topic search, which is not necessarily available in the databases, although you can do a subject search, which is kind of close. But I think that the topic search really lends itself to student searching styles. Another thing is that resources are hyperlinked, so if you need to know more about the Pew Research Center, just click on it, whereas otherwise you would have to look it up. There are special sections to the newspapers that don't make it into the databases. So for example, Room for Debate is a great example. That's like the New York Times alternative to Opposing Viewpoints, or Points of View Reference Center, or CQ Researcher. And then the other thing you have are these lovely interactive tools. So this is an interactive map. So you hover over one thing and the map appears. So another database that we're thinking about is called Statista. And this is census data from around the world that's really packaged in a way that is very practical for high school searchers. We absolutely love this. So we'll walk through it just a little bit. Let's say we're looking for Syrian refugees. And we have, these are our results for Syrian refugees. We're kind of going through the list and we see one thing that's a little bit interesting, but it's not necessarily giving us the answer that we're looking for. So we're looking for refugees, major source countries from all over the world as of 2014. So that's what we're going to point to. And now we have this sort of table but we have different ways of looking at the output. Then we're going to compare that to refugees worldwide from 2001 to 2014, because that's going to give us comparative data from Syria, from those coming from Syria versus those coming from all the rest of the world. So we can create a percentage out of that. So here we have that, and we can look at the 2014 year, and we have some data that we can put together. And then we can look at the leading countries of origin for refugees in the worldwide from 2013. So now we're taking different pieces of information and we're looking at all of this data, but it's coming out in different formats, so we're not sure how to blend it. But what we do have is this option to export to Excel. And so once you take all of that, you can start to create a really great analysis. So that little chart at the bottom offers the comparison of Syrian refugees to Afghan refugees in 2013 and 2014, and shows a significant shift in the exodus from both of those countries, depending on what kind of political crisis they are up against. So, and then you can generate a data. This would be a brilliant thing to include in your research paper. You're generating your own understanding of this data. And that's what we love about Statista. Additionally, we have Social Explorer. Now that's taking US Census data, and it gives it to you, it puts it out in a map form. So in this example, we're looking at basically zip codes with owner-occupied housing that cost more than $1 million versus owner-occupied housing units of less than $20,000 across the world, or across the country. So you can see that the highest incidence is the darkest portions. So that's a little bit interesting. You can see where we are up in the Northeast. On the left-hand map, you can see the Northeast is highly populated. You can see that California is highly populated. You got some interesting pockets in Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona. That's probably Scottsdale, Arizona is my guess, etc. Now here's another map that we've done, is households of less than $20,000 a year versus and then we're comparing that to population 25 years and over who have less than a high school degree. So we're looking at some concentrations across the lower United States, which is kind of an interesting phenomenon. And then you also have some serious pockets out in Washington, and also in North Dakota. Here's another one where we're comparing the population of 25 years or less, of 25 years or over who have less than a high school education, as opposed to those who have a master's degree or more. And you'll notice a huge comparison or correlation between the property values and the master's degree or more, because we're looking at very similar pockets as we did earlier. All right, Roper iPoll is one of the others that we're going to talk about very briefly that is not included in the search results for EBSCO Discovery Service. And that is, and so Roper iPoll is a public opinion survey database. So it's generating, anytime you hear about an ABC poll or a New York Times poll or a Quinnipiac poll or a Gallup poll, all of that content goes into this database. It's It hasn't updated its interface in quite a while, but it's really great content. So in this example, I looked at the war in Afghanistan, and how Americans felt about our involvement in military affairs in Afghanistan. So we started with 1987, so that's when the Soviet Union was there. And then we went to 2001, shortly, is this before or after 9/11? I don't know the exact date. Yes, it was after 9/11. And then we went to 2003 when we started getting involved in military conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. And then we went to 2006, and then 2009 after Obama was elected, and then 2013, and then 2015. So then we can take all of that information, we can generate that, put it into a spreadsheet, and start creating our own data. And this is basically somewhat serious was classified as opposed. So we have support or oppose, and look at how that changed over the course of time. The numbers are really quite radical, and you can see obviously the support went straight up after 9/11 and then shot back way down to 17% in 2013. It's very interesting to watch that. And then if that was a subject that you were writing about, that would be great research to include in your research paper. So the question is, how do we access these resources? So CQ Researcher, ProQuest, Statista, Social Explorer, and Roper iPoll. The only way to access them really is through the database page, or all of those links, all of those titles on the right-hand column are all hyperlinked and will take you straight through from EBSCO Discovery Service results straight out to those individual databases. And that's a really great vehicle for you to access them because they are now linked and you are authenticated, so you don't need to enter your username and password all the way through. And that's all we have for today. That was a long lesson. Thanks for your patience.